Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Season 2 of our podcast. We're going to start this first episode by introducing the topic for this season and giving a little background. Before we do that, though, let's talk about any gaming we've done since the last time we were together recording, or gaming experiences we've had, so that we can have just kind of warm up back into this. Brent?
So, over the break, I played Innovation, which was a really cool card game. Frank and I played it together.
That was cool.
One day. It worked great as a two-player game, which doesn't happen very often. I don't even know how to describe the games.
So it's a civilization building game in terms of the theme. I guess it's set collection. I don't know. What I mainly remember is that I want to play it again because it left me more curious. I was figuring out how the game plays, not really playing the game. I think I need another play or two under my belt to say, how good is this game? It seemed to be good. For a card game, there was certainly a lot going on.
It was nice. The rules were fairly simple, even though it had a lot of complications built into the game within the cards themselves. And each card gives you a new ability, a new thing you can do. So each card you have to read as you're playing it. And I think that was part of the problem, was reading all of those cards took a long time. That's
probably true. It's more complicated to give you a frame of reference. The tech tree is more involved in building up your civilization than, say, Seven Wonders. And it's a longer card game, too.
Yeah, it's a longer card game. I think it was phased around 45 minutes. So.
Yeah, that was really... It seemed like it was going to be a lot of fun, but we were still definitely, at least for me, I was still learning the game.
This is how a lot of our gaming experiences go with new games, right? We play it and then we're like, I don't really know anything about that game, other than I want to play it again.
Well, part of the problem is it was not... I mean, it's a couple of weeks have gone by and Christmas has happened, and so, yeah, I mean, that's part of it.
Or they go, I really don't ever want to play that again.
Yeah, that does happen.
We at least learned that in the first playthrough.
Yeah. There's been a few of those, too.
Yeah, I don't need to play that again to determine the thing.
Conversely, I also played, and we got, with my wife, Evolution: The Beginning, which I know Evolution's a bigger game. I don't know anything about that one because we haven't played it. But The Beginning is a really simple game. You start with, they call them species, really they're cards, and the cards do everything, but you have a number of species that you can give traits to, and it's, can you outlast the other person? Can you feed all your species? Can they adapt to the point where they can get food? And so you're playing against the other person, but also in your own set there of how many species can you manage, and how evolved can those species get before you can't survive anymore. And then at the scoring, it's a numbers game of how many you have and how complicated those species are.
So is that a you want to play it again game or never again game?
I would play it again.
Yeah, that's good.
I would actually be interested to see how that goes on to the other Evolution set games.
Yeah, I've never played either of those. Any of those. So it sounds like you two had a chance to play some games together, whereas I haven't played with either of you, but I did have a chance to play a few... No new games, but a few games. So some of my friends from college and I got together for a Friendsgiving, and we played Codenames and Mysterium. And for the first time ever, I got to be the dead guy in Mysterium, which was pretty fun. I'd never gotten to do that before, so that was good. And then I've played a lot of Magic. So my friend Alexander hasn't been working too much in the season, just like me, and so we've gotten together a lot and played a lot of Magic. I'm not any better at it, or worse, I guess. But...
Is this the guy with the $2,000 deck?
No, that is not. So I love playing with Alexander because he loves the game of Magic so much. He loves comboing and getting cool cards out, sometimes to the detriment of winning. Like, he just wants to do tons of cool stuff in the game, which is okay. So it's pretty fun to play with him. And he also, discovers cards in his deck as he's playing with his deck, or things he didn't realize they did, which is really funny as well. I joke with him all the time that his move is to take his whole turn and then at the end of it go, wait, can I take all of that back? And then he, like, scoops all of his cards back up and then takes his turn all over again because he realizes something at the
But
end
there
of
was
it.
another way to combo that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Which I feel like sometimes we do playing board games. Like, we start doing stuff and then we're like, wait a minute. And we stop ourselves.
And that's fine in a learning game. I mean, when you're really just trying to figure out the game, I don't have any problems with that. Now, once you're an experienced player at the game, no, you should know what you're doing.
That's true. Although I'm not sure I ever remember enough to be considered a very experienced player.
Sometimes that's an issue. Yes, I agree.
That's all right. So, Frank, what about you? What have you been up to in your gaming life since last time?
So the most interesting thing was I had a week-long training event down in Florida, and it rained the entire time. This is a series of a couple of different trainings.
That's the best weather for a gamer.
And so it really is. So I had taken several games with me, and some people had played them the last time we were all together. So we played a little bit of... Well, first we started playing Love Letter, because somebody hadn't played that before, and we were still waiting on other people. Then we played Codenames, and we ended up with The Resistance. But at one point in time, I think we had probably a dozen people playing and another 6 people watching, which was over half of all the people involved, including facilitators. And it was just, the one facilitator looks at me, because I was filling in to even out the teams in Codenames. And as soon as somebody else walked up, I'd say, well, take my spot, and I'd back out. And one of the facilitators said, you're like a proud parent here with all these kids playing. And all these people playing. And I said, yeah, well, I said, this is team building. And conversation went on from there. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great experience. So
sounds like you ran a one-table convention.
It kind of was. We actually were told by the hotel staff that we needed to quiet down playing The Resistance.
It's not something you hear very often playing board games.
No, it's not. Although in that game you can hear it sometimes.
So I had an interesting experience playing Magic one day. I was down at Alexander's, and he had a few other friends over. So we're playing a 4-player game, and there's this concept in Magic called scooping, where, like, when you know you're going to lose or you don't want to play anymore, you just kind of pick up all your cards and you're out of the game. And I always feel so unsure about this concept, right? Because I think sometimes in Magic it does get to a point where you just know one player's going to win and the other one's not. At least in a 2-player game. But when there's like 4 or 5 people, I feel like there's so many variables that to just like pick up your cards and be like, I'm done. I don't know. It just seems really odd to me. And then I thought about what would happen if you're playing a board game. So say you're playing Catan and there's 4 people playing, and halfway through the game you just say, alright, I'm done, and you pick up all your pieces and leave. Like, that's just I don't know. That whole idea of scooping is just an odd concept to me. What do you guys think about that? Just kind of picking up your pieces and being done if you know you're not going to win.
It sounds like an episode.
I guess it's true.
So interestingly enough, we were just talking about runaway leader games at work today, and people were asking me to describe that, and that seems like where that comes in, is someone's gone on ahead, they're gonna win. Or maybe it's a little bit inverses, I know I'm gonna lose, and a little bit of that. But I mean, what I said about it there is still true. I think with multiple players, there's no way to know, because as long as everybody's playing the game correctly, you're not playing one player, you're playing everyone else around you, and that affects the rest of the game.
Right.
So I would agree with you. I think if there's more than one other player, that's not a technique that should happen very often, or should happen at all.
Yeah.
So I guess my feeling on this is a little mixed. So if it's a 2-player game, that's no different than resigning in chess. Like, if you've got absolutely no problem with resignation.
Certainly.
No problem. In a multiplayer game, I would say there's we toss around the term social contract, but there's a social contract to stay in the game and play your best, not king-making until the end. However, the exception to that is if it's gotten to the point where one person is far enough ahead that this has started becoming a chore for everybody else, and everybody agrees to end the game, I think that's okay. You don't get to back out on your own. But if everybody else says, yeah, this looks like a foregone conclusion, and we've done that in our group, normally it's because we're hitting a time constraint on top of everything else. So it's not, oh, this hasn't become fun. It's this, we're starting to hit a time constraint rather than push people's schedule. Looks pretty clear that this person's going to win. Let's just call it a game. They won and move on.
Yeah, I think kind of the circumstance I think of more, and I've encountered more, I think I agree with you too on both of those, but more the idea, so say there's a 4-player game, and 3 of them are doing well and 1 person struggling, that one person that's struggling kind of just picking up and walking out on the game. Which that I struggle with a little bit more because, again, as you said, that kind of social contract, that idea that we've all agreed to sit down and play this game to its conclusion. I think part of it is, too, in Magic, like, I'm about to beat them and I have a really cool way to do it, and then they just don't let me do it and they leave.
Well, that's so, yeah, that...
Which is kind of selfish, but I'm like, I want to do my cool things.
I'm not sure that is selfish, because that is when somebody has set up a really cool ending, and then you spoil, on some level, you're spoiling their fun.
Yeah.
Right? That even though they're going to win, if they've come up with, particularly in a game like Magic, where you're playing combos, it's not just a slog, but there is a combination of things. Even chess, there may be a combination of things that are happening to make that win, and you can be in a losing position, but that combo is coming up, or that forced play is coming up in chess, and you're going to win, even though right now. So to take that away from that winner, I would not want to do that.
Especially after playing for 2 hours. That can be a little...
Yeah.
I might back off just a little bit, only because Magic is a player elimination game. And so if that person's close enough to being eliminated anyways, and I think that's some of the difference between Magic and a lot of board games, is a lot of board games aren't player elimination. So even if you aren't doing well, you're going to still be in the game and potentially do something. But yeah. Magic, if you know you have nothing in your deck that's going to help you live another round.
And I think that gets down right to the social, political part of games as well. Because even if you're not going to win, there's still an opportunity to influence games.
Well, that's...
In any player elimination game, there's still opportunity to influence.
Or any game, right?
Yeah.
You can, even if it's not player elimination. And in fact, if your example earlier of using Catan, you were using Catan to say what happens there. Well, if I pull out of the game, there's a hole left in the game. There's pieces on the board now. How are those pieces going to interact if you're not there? There's now less resources coming into the game because you're not drawing cards for us to trade with you and that kind of stuff. So it does leave a hole in the game. Mm-hmm. The only time I've done that recently at all was that game of Blood Rage that I kind of bowed out because it was a rough day. We'll leave it at that. But I actually did that within the rules. There was a way within the rules that you could, it was down to the last turn, and there was a way to pass your last turn. Basically, that's all I did was pass my last turn.
Yeah.
And then I got up and cooked dinner for the group.
I don't think anybody would complain about cooking dinner.
Well, that could be.
All right, so we're past Christmas. Did you guys get any good games for Christmas? What did you get?
So for Christmas, I got 3 games. One was Ruins of Thandor, which we talked about a lot on the Christmas episode. So I got it. Good job. The other ones I got were Game of Thrones 2nd edition.
I'm looking forward to that.
We also talked about, and it looks really interesting to play. We'll have to tell you how it goes after we can manage to get it to the table.
We'll have to see who is willing to play, because it's one of those might end a friendship games.
Yeah, it's a 2 to 4 hour war game, man. We'll see
with backstabbing.
Some, not much.
Lots of potential for backstabbing.
Potential for backstabbing,
yes. Yes.
As should be expected on a Game of Thrones.
Exactly.
And then I also got Broom Service, which I read the rules for. I know nothing else about, except it looks like it's a decent game, looks like it's a good game, and it plays around 45 minutes. So that'll be another one that'll probably actually make it to the table at a game day and potentially play there.
So that one, there was a sticker on it that said, did it win or was a runner-up for Kennerspiel des Jahres, which is the German Gamers Game of the Year award.
I thought it was the winner, but I don't know for sure.
I think it was the winner, but that was a couple years ago. I don't remember back that far.
I've never actually heard that word spoken.
Kennerspiel?
Yeah. I just come up with weird names in my head.
So I listen to enough podcasts, I hear other people pronounce it, and I just mimic them.
There you go.
So it may not be right.
Sounds like a wise decision.
What'd you get, Shane?
So I only got a few games. This Christmas was a super practical one. Those who know me will not be surprised that many of my clothes have holes in them. So I got lots of new clothes for Christmas, which is good. So I got Codename Pictures, which were like, I put them on my list just thinking, down the road I'll pick them up, and so then I got them for Christmas, which is good because I don't have any good party-ish style games. Group games. So that was a good addition to my collection. And then my wife got me the game Lifeboat, which, Frank, you mentioned you knew a little bit about. I know nothing about, so that'll be interesting to play and learn about that game. So those are the games that I got. What about you, Frank?
So I got one. I got the 10th anniversary edition of In the Year of the Dragon. And the last time I had heard this discussed on a podcast was a few years ago, and I honestly don't know that much about it. So we'll see. It'll come out early this year at a game day. So.
I think sometimes those are the best games to get. The games that, there are mechanisms in them that you like or themes that you like, but you don't necessarily know a whole lot about, and so you can kind of discover them.
So, I think you're right. A few years ago, gosh, it's 4 or so ago, I got Russian Railroads, and I had on my list. It was the bottom of the ones that I really wanted. I had 6 or 7 games on the list. This was at the bottom, but it was a train game. It was a little different train game. I really didn't know that much about it. It's a worker placement game. I love worker placement games, but they hadn't even played enough of those to know that at that point in time. So I got it and was like, and it's not a simple game. It's a relatively complex game. I love that game.
Yeah.
And that was such a great surprise. When I played it, I was like, wow, that is fantastic.
Yeah, I guess the alternative is it could just be garbage too. But
it's
fun to discover new games you didn't know were out there or hadn't heard of.
If it makes my list, which In the Year of the Dragon was not on my list, but I was excited to get it because it is a good game. I looked it up. It's within the top 200 on Board Game Geek, which, they normally say in any group of things, the top 1% is excellent. And that puts it well within the top one. That puts it in like the top 0.02%.
Yeah.
Or top 0.2%, something like that. So I was really excited for that. It was not really on my radar at all. But if you see it on my list, I've also thought real hard about whether I want it or not. Because when you've got as many games as I do, you gotta start thinking about shelf space sometimes.
That's true. That's true.
There's plenty. Just take some of these other things off.
Well, yeah, now that becomes a family decision, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for me with new games, I kind of have 2 methods. 1, ask one of you to see if you know anything about it. Or 2, if it's like a 6.5 or above on Board Game Geek, I think it's at least worth researching and looking more into, and digging into a little bit to see if it's a game I think I would like.
I would agree.
If it's below that, I generally won't spend too much time, but if it's above that, I'll look into a little bit more and consider.
I tend to pay attention to rank a little bit on Board Game Geek, not because I think that makes it a necessarily better game, but clearly if it's gotten that high. So for those of you who don't know how that ranking works, it's not just a matter of what the rating on it is, but how many ratings it gets. So it's a little bit of a popularity contest. But my feeling is, since I'm not, I'm not buying games to play by myself. So maybe if a lot of people like them, it'll go over well with the group too.
Yeah.
So
it's a good idea.
Okay, so I mentioned worker placement. This is probably a good place to kick in with what the topic for this season's going to be. So we're gonna last season we talked about the different types of games, war games, European games, and the like. This season, we're going to talk about mechanisms and what those are. Now, I'm going to state right up front that you will hear us use the term mechanism, and you will hear us use the word mechanics. And for our purposes, those are the exact same thing. There's some history there where some people in the hobby started changing from one term to the other. We've never been big on either term in particular, so if you hear mechanism or you hear mechanic, we're talking about the same thing. And that is the actual, what actions you go through, things you go through that make that game going. So we'll probably start off with dice, to be honest with you, and we will get into things like movement, how boards are put together, whether they're modular boards or things like that. And then towards the end of the year, we'll talk about worker placement, because that's one that may have been less seen by the audience. It tends to show up only in hobby games. It's not one you're going to find in a typical mass market game.
Yeah, so the way that I tend to think about mechanics and what mechanics are is that mechanics are the physical actions you take while playing a game that are metaphors or represent thematic actions within the game. So say we're playing Seven Wonders and somebody passes me a card, right? The physical action is I take a card out of that hand and I lay it down on the table. That's part of the mechanic, right? I'm building a set of cards on the table. But what that really represents is me building a civilization during a certain time period, whether I'm pursuing having a large army or building up my science knowledge, right? I'm not actually building my science knowledge. The mechanic is picking the card, setting it on the table, and that mechanic is representative of something that's taking place within the game.
So to bring this down to an even lower level here, because Shane liked to take it way up high.
Whoops.
The reason I think that this is good to talk about right now during the podcast is because this is how gamers talk to each other. So they don't have to describe the full game. They don't have to talk about everything that goes on. They can use a few short words and describe a game to someone, and they can pick up on whether that's something that they might be interested in or if they've ever played something like that before. So I think that's part of why I think this is most important at this point, is just to get everyone else in the same jargon as us.
I agree.
Yeah, that's really true. This past Christmas, my wife Jen and I were over at Frank's for an open house, and we were talking about board games, of course, because what else would you do when we get together? And Jenna brought up something that, I wanted to cry tears of joy and pride. I was so proud of her. But she mentioned that talking about mechanics is really a good way for her now to figure out if she likes to play a game or not. Right? She's pretty casual. She plays games to humor me and to have social time. She's not necessarily huge into the games. But she's really starting to figure out what she likes in games. So she really likes deck building games. So things like Dominion, or Star Realms. And she also...
like my copy of Star Realms that you have?
Your copy of Star Realms that I've had for months, yes.
After you gave my
After
copy.
I borrowed Brent's copy and gave it back. So, sometimes it feels like half of my board game collection doesn't actually belong to me. But that's a whole nother story. And so, the fact that, we're much more into games than she is, but that she's able to now use this language to categorize games that she thinks she'll enjoy playing. So like a game day, when we decide 2 or 3 games we're going to play, she can ask and figure out what games she might like best, as well as what people she likes best, pair them up.
That does have to
Right.
figure into the decision.
Well,
Pretty much. She usually doesn't play with me, so that might be a sign.
that is very important. And at some point in time, probably not this season, but at some point in time we'll get into that too, is because board gaming is such a social experience. When we talk about this is the game, and this is the mechanisms, and this is the theme, and this is the whatever, and now you have an idea of whether you would like the game or not. That still may, you may look at the other 3 people who are going to sit down at that table and go, yeah, but I'm going to pick a different game, because those 3 people the way they play games is not a way that I enjoy. That's another topic, but it certainly is just as important.
Well, and sometimes that's just based on mood, right? There might be a day I'm not in the mood to play an intense, serious game.
Well, that's true.
And knowing, if I'm going to sit down with, Frank and Brent, it's probably going to be a heavier game. And so I may not just be in the mood for that, so I'll go to the other table. So not even who do I get along with, but just kind of what kind of mood am I in that day.
Sure.
But yeah, so this season we're talking about mechanics, and we'll share a bunch of different mechanics as well as which ones we like the most and the least. We all have different preferences, similar, but different preferences on different mechanics and kind of what your experience of those games might be, as well as give you some suggestions of games that use those mechanics that we really enjoy. So if you say, I've never played a worker placement game, well, you may not know what that means yet, but you will, as well as we'll give you some ideas of games that we really like that utilize that mechanic. We hope that you'll join us this season as we talk about mechanics in all of these different games. And as always, we hope that you're playing more games, that you're learning new games, and that you're growing in the love of games.
Thanks for listening. Please share this podcast with other people and help us grow our listeners.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.